Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Catholics Live in Discipleship. I'm your host, Darren Nelson. My hope is that through these conversations that we have with individuals talking about their own faith journey, Catholic organizations talking about how they help parishes foster discipleship and mission to help them become more vibrant, and key parish leaders where we're talking about the challenges and successes that they have helping their parish move from maintenance to mission. My hope is that these stories inspire and encourage transformation both at a personal level as well as a parish level. In today's conversation, I think you're going to find that the guests are very familiar to you, and I hope that the book that we're going to be discussing has become familiar to you as well. Today, I have the fortunate opportunity to have a conversation with Father Mike White and Tom Corcoran from Rebuilt. I'm sure many of you are very familiar with their first book, Rebuilt, where they talk about the ways in which they helped their parish become a vibrant Catholic community. And even today, they now have a coaching program that parishes can reach out to them and they can help coach your parish. Well, today we talk about their newest book, Rebuilt Faith, which was released a year ago. And I just want to share that I recorded this actually a year ago with them. And right after the recording, unfortunately, my mom suddenly passed away. And as my family was grieving that loss, my dad then suddenly passed away a few months after that. So I really had to take some time to allow the Lord to guide and heal me. So I first want to say my apologies to Father Mike and Tom Corcoran and Ave Maria Press for not being able to get this episode out at the time of the book release. However, in this conversation, I think you're going to find that we're not only talking about the book, Rebuilt Faith, but we're really talking about our own personal faith journey as well. And I think you're also going to find that when you listen to this conversation as well as read the book, it's really going to inspire you to think about who you can share this book with. So let's jump into the conversation and see how the Holy Spirit inspires us to it. But first of all, I just want to thank you, Father Michael and Tom Corcoran. Listeners, you're very familiar with both of them. They wrote a book called Rebuilt back in 2013, which really was speaking about how they were helping their parish and their community be transformed by the very things that they were doing at a parish level. And most importantly, the individual as well, and how to transform people who can become very excited about their faith. And that's what we're going to be talking a little bit about today is their new book, which is Rebuilt Faith, which is the book for many of you familiar with some of my communication out to you guys about the book, and so very excited to have you guys here today. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Darren.
Yeah,
Thanks, Sharon.
yeah. You know, before we jump into the book, there's one question that I think is always important for us who work within parish life to just think about, talk about. And just real quick, I'd love to, after all the experience that you guys have had and success, we can use that word, the success in it, what are some of the challenges or a challenge that you still face at your parish? And maybe Father Michael, you might want to start, and then Tom, just share something that you feel is still a challenge.
I think that engagement is always a challenge, and it's the real benchmark for health and growth in the life of the parish. But it has to be constantly attended to. It has to be constantly addressed. It's a challenge that we need to rise to again and again in every season. We're getting ready to launch a small group effort to get additional people involved in small groups. And as successful as that's been here with our previous efforts, it remains a challenge that stands before us. And the same is true with giving and serving and even just attendance.
Yeah, thank you. Tom, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, my first is, it said about ministry, it'd be easy if it wasn't for the people, right? And so I do feel like yeah, there's just people issues all the time, and they come up, and working with the staff, and we have a great staff, but there's just things that come up, and miscommunications. There's challenges of that. There's sometimes personalities, and I think those never go away. We can get better at them, and we can grow in them, but some part of us has to just accept them. And sometimes when we hit them, they're very frustrating and challenging. Sometimes you think you've gotten past that and you haven't. So that to me is the thing. I think the ongoing challenge of, investing in a team and investing in people. There's the beauty of that, but there's also always the challenges of that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, two things that you guys said that really resonate with me is first, communication, right? Communicating to people, especially in today's world. It's not like it was back in 2000 or even 2013, right? It
Yeah.
is constantly changing, and the way in which people want to be communicated to is different in so many different ways in the different demographics in one parish, right? And we really have to be mindful and attentive to that, and it makes it a little bit more challenging. You can't just have one way of communicating, right? The other thing too is um, the engagement. How do we encourage and engage people both inside a parish community and outside a parish community to participate in the very thing that we want them to participate, growing in their faith. That's why I always like to help people grow in what does it really mean to be mission, you know, to share my faith, to witness. And even with and I'm sure you guys find this, and this is what one of the things the book really helps us to reflect on is how do I be that witness, and in what way is God calling me to be that witness and not say Tom or Father Michael, because we're all called in a different way, right?
Yeah,
So,
I think to what you're saying, Darren, just to go back to that first point about the difficulty, the methods people want to be communicated with are, yes, they're varied in ways never before, which is what's even more important that as a parish that we get on our core message. We know what we are trying to communicate week to week, season to season, month to month, right? Year to year. It's so important that a parish understands what is our message this week. Again, see it all the time. Parishes, they have about 15 messages in one single weekend.
mm-hmm,
Trying to get solidified down to what they want it to, what their message is, or, you know, to the idea of, the book we put out, Rebuild Faith. It's what are the ways you want people to grow, and be very clear on that and communicate that over and over and over again. And then you could do the different methods, but it's really important that there is a core message you have and you understand what you want people to know and what you want people to do, and then communicate it over and over again.
yeah, yeah, so true. And so just to kind of move from that about the message, what inspired you guys through your ministry work to write this book, Rebuilt Faith? What was some of the inspiration in your work that said, this is going to be an important book for us to write? So, Father Michael, what were some of your
I think I think before the inspiration came the frustration.
yeah.
Um, we uh, subtitled our book Handbook for Skeptical Catholics because over and over again we encounter skeptical Catholics, and skepticism is okay. The apostles were skeptical after the resurrection, even. Um, all of us are skeptical from time to time, but I think that there's a wider skepticism out there that we all encounter in our families, among our friends, in our neighborhood associations. Just a skepticism of religion and of church in general, and that's fine, but it can't get in the way of faith and of a relationship with Christ.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. Tom, what are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, part of it is the frustration, and then I think, frustration and inspiration, because as we share in the book is what we know has worked in our community. That as we studied other parishes, other churches, and then kind of brought some different what we would call steps of discipleship to our parish, we see again as you are clear in what you want people to do, of how to, Father Michael talked about that challenge of engagement, knowing as you are clear on how you want people to engage, they will engage. And as we were able, and we see these steps of discipleship growing our own faith and enlivening that. And, as we have this encounter with Christ, and that's a little bit, we're in an age of people talk about the skeptical Catholic, and we think often apologetics is the answer, but we're in an age of experience. So really, I think more the answer to skepticism, as much as I believe in truth and apologetics, is an encounter with Christ, and that's what's going to answer that. And so some of the book is these steps of discipleships that help us have an encounter with Christ or take us deeper in our relationship with Christ.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you guys were sharing that, I'm sure our listeners are saying, yeah, I'm frustrated as well with people who are skeptical, and they get that frustration from the encounters that they're having with others out there, their friends, their families, maybe other small groups of circles that they're trying to have conversations about, maybe being Catholic or just their faith journey in general. And they're saying, yeah, there's a lot of skeptical people. And that's what I love about this book, is it helps provide something for two people. And this is what I loved about the book. For myself reading it, right, there's always a little skepticism within my own faith journey, right? So like the and here's what I mean by that. The doubt that sometimes comes into my life in my faith journey. And so in reading the book, it really helped reinforce a lot of things for myself in my faith journey, but also the second person being, who is that person in my life that I keep trying to have conversations with? They're a little skeptic that this book could be good for, and I've sent it to two people because of that, and I've had people respond to me through the emails I send out. Hey, Darren, I got the book. I love the book. So, I don't know if that resonates with you guys as well, but I that's what I really loved about the book too, is it made me reflect on my own faith journey, and also encouraged me to think about the others who I can be working with.
Well, that's definitely our hope, is that it can be for the people who is already, such as yourself, Darren, that are going to church each week and their faith matters and a way to go deeper. But for that person that's maybe on the fringes of faith, that as they read it, they see the invitation to something more in the relationship with Christ. And that, again, as they take these steps and kind of see a more fulsome relationship with Christ, or more fulsome part of their faith.
Yeah.
The steps that we talk about are initial steps of discipleship for sure, but they're the steps of discipleship that we take over and over and over again.
Yeah. 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 And I love to read. I love to read. And here's something I'm really interested in asking you. I believe I know the answer, but I really want the listeners to hear it from both of you. You could have written the book almost in any way that you wanted to. Why the 40-day reflection? Why that way instead of not just a general chapter book? Why the 40-day?
We love 40 as a biblical number. 40 was the number of years the Israelites wandered in the desert. 40 was the number of days that Jesus spent in prayer and fasting in preparation for his ministry. And 40 is just a solid number when it comes to adapting new habits and new disciplines.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a couple other reasons, again, one, we want to be transformational. So in reading a little bit each day, you can soak it up and you're not rushing off to the next thing. Because I do a lot with books. A lot of times I read so much, but don't always process all of it. So there's questions at the end of each chapter to help us process it. Also, our hope is that parishes will read it. So we also have materials available to parish leaders, such as homilies and small group materials. So all those three things are meant to come together, that you hear a homily on Sunday about the basic topic or step of discipleship. you read about it a little bit each day over the week, you're in a small group, that all that comes together to bring more, again, a transformation and a change. And of course, again, this is something others have done before us. We're not pioneering that. Especially Rick Warren and Purpose Driven Life did that the same as well. But that's the way the book is intended to be read. While certainly someone can read it on their own apart from a parish, our hope is they're going to read it with a parish, and it's going to draw them into a community at some point.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you know what I really love about this book is you want to journey with the person. For me, when I was reading it, it was about journey, right? The 40 days, the journey. We want to journey with you through these topics in a way, to your point, Tom, in a way that we hope it transforms you. And one of the persons that I sent the book to, I was thinking about, yeah, he's not going to read a chapter book like other books. And all these books that I may mention are great books, like Forming and Intentional Disciples, or Made for Mission. Like, love, love, love those books. But to send it to the individual I'm thinking about, hey, it's just take it a day at a time. You know what? And the chapter's not like 30 pages long. It's reflective. It's easy. For me, when I was thinking about that skeptical person, I'm trying to encourage them to come back into their faith again. I found that was more chewable for that individual than what do you? Because I did send a book to a friend who was just coming back into the faith. That was a chapter book, and following up with him, I'm like, hey, how was it? Yeah, I haven't gotten started yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it just seemed to be a little more intimidating. But
Yeah, I think the other thing too is, one of the things you want, in one of the steps of discipleship we talk about is practice prayer and sacraments, and especially practicing prayer and having that quiet time each day where you are praying. And that's obviously one of the clearest, some of the other steps we talk about, I don't think as a church we do enough to connect the dots between discipleship and, say, serving or giving. But everyone knows prayer is part of growing as a follower of Christ, or spirituality, right? Or having a spiritual life. So hopefully what this does, though, is help. If you read 10 minutes a day, it is a prayer. Like, it can become your prayer, right? Spiritual reading is prayer.
yeah,
And so hopefully it's helping people a little bit unintentionally develop that discipline of like, all right, for 10 minutes a day, I'm going to read. And then after this is done, you can find something else that can help you in your prayer time. So
yeah,
hopefully it's setting up a kind of building in even one of the habits of discipleship with you kind of sneaking it in a positive way.
yeah, yeah. So for any listeners right now, if you're listening before Lent, this is a great Lent book. If you're listening to this podcast after Lent, it's still a great book for your prayer life. So, get one, pick one up. Tom and Father Michael, you guys work with many parishes as well. And, whenever I go into a parish and I'm starting to help the leadership there, you always hear this question: how do we get people to come back to Mass? Right? How do we get those skeptical Catholics to come back to Mass? So we look at the book, which is broken up into 6 parts. Why didn't you start with, hey, how do we get people back to Mass? Why didn't you guys start with that one big question that everybody's always trying to answer? Why didn't you start with that one? I would share that.
Michael, you want me to go, or do you have some thoughts on that?
You go.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, in some ways, I think we wrote that book, which was Rebuild itself. I think that's
Right.
part of what in that book is, and we talk about the weekend experience of the way we get people back to Mass is, first of all, as leaders, we give them something to offer. We add value. One of the things that drives me crazy is when people say, well, I get nothing out of Mass, and people would say, well, what are you putting into it? But I want to go back to those of us who lead in churches, and I'll put myself into that, and to pastors and priests. We need to put energy and effort into it first before we can expect anybody else there to come and be a part of it. So I guess partly we wrote the book, and partly this is kind of written for the people that either one, you are coming to church and you're looking for something more, or for the people who maybe won't get to church, but how do I, and again, we hope it eventually does draw you into Christian community. One of the steps is engage in Christian community. We hope it'll help you find a community. But even if you're before that, some of the first week, especially looking at the person of Jesus, is helping you remind yourself, people walk away from the church all the time. I've never met, and I've heard different reasons, and they're very valid reasons. And whatever reason someone listening to this might not be going to church, I'm sure it's very valid. But I don't hear people say, you know what, I just walked away because I don't really believe Jesus is the Messiah. I don't really like Jesus. That's why I walked away from church, right?
Yeah.
And so we want to connect you back to Jesus first. Let's start there, and then we can go from those other steps after that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I resonate with that, Tom, very well. I too have never, maybe a few, whenever I talk with people as to why they've stepped away from the church, maybe one or two have said, I just really couldn't get with a real relationship with God. That wasn't working. But you're right. Most of the time, it's not that. It's some other situation. It's not about that relationship with Christ. And I love the fact that you started here. I believe this is where we need to start. And I'll just say this real quick. Listeners know this story, but back in 2014, right around when your book, Sherry Weidell's book, had come out, I was working at a parish, very active, helping a pastor, develop a lot of ministries, good practicing Catholic, but I realized that I didn't have that personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And I said, this has to be important in my life. And I started to pursue that. And in the pursuit of that, everything else became more significant and important in my life. Going to Mass became more significant and important. Reconciliation, some of the things that you talk about in the book here. So, I love the fact that you started with that there. So
Yeah. Well, thanks. Yeah. And I think that's a little bit too, probably our own journey too, is that, and it's amazing we can grow up in the church, and the reading this weekend is 1 Samuel, about the call of Samuel, but he hadn't learned how to listen to the voice of God. That happens all the time. So I don't think that's not condemning. It lights click on for people at different times, but if we can, just going back to that personal relationship with Christ and starting there, and again, starting fresh there, then sometimes some of the other things we've heard in church the lights can come on, or we start to connect the dots. But getting back to basics,
yeah,
helpful.
yeah. And one of the things that I find, I'm sure you guys find as well, is oftentimes when people at the parish or even out in the community, they're doing good things, they're helping to serve the community. They're doing it oftentimes more out of, this is what I need to do.
Mhm.
What's the connection between, what would you share with our listeners as the important connection between week one, really getting to know Jesus, and week two, serving, which is the second week?
I think the first thing to say on that, again, is each of the steps we then say are helping us develop both a relationship with Christ and become more like him. And each of these steps also build our personal faith and our corporate faith of the church, or build the whole church up. So, I mean, we start that second week about serve, just about what Jesus said about himself. He did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life. So that really, in learning to serve, we're becoming more like Jesus. And also that as we serve with Jesus, as we work with him in a common mission and common effort, again, we develop that deeper friendship with him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think that service is also the easiest sell when it comes to parishioners and the disengaged from church entirely. I think that we live in an age of service, and people understand this. Kids serve in school. And whether it's, going to a soup kitchen or going to a foreign country, it's very easy for people to understand that this is a value. And when we can connect that back to Christ, then we're strengthening their faith in Christ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And really helps us to see the very mission that we're called to be a part of, right? Like, right, with that deep connection with Jesus and the way he teaches us to serve, we serve for the very mission and building up the kingdom. So I think that's the connection. I don't know if that was in your intention or not, but that was the connection that I thought helped me with as well.
Yeah, I mean, a couple things to that too. I think, yeah, you mentioned the obligation, and that's what we have to kind of change. That we don't have to do this; we get to do this. That one of the themes through the book is we try to point out. In fact, so in writing a book, we'd like to say, without me, it would never get started. Without Father Michael, it would never get finished. And so Father Michael edits a lot of what I wrote, and he would get annoyed at me. He's like, you keep saying this 100 times, so about, blessings come out of following Jesus, and here are the rewards, and again, luckily, hopefully that theme still is in the book, but that is hopefully that is a theme that comes over and over again, that there are rewards from following Jesus, and that we stay focused on that, and there is rewards in serving, and that also helps us have the right heart for it. And each of these weeks we do kind of end on, how's your heart on this? Father Michael, do you want to add anything to that, or you kind of leaned in, other than your frustration with me and that process?
No, Tom, never.
So,
Yeah. Well, I want to take something from chapter 18, I believe it was from, which is the third week, and the third week's talking about tithe and give. And it says, it speaks about using our money to move closer to God. And I loved the fact that that was addressed in that way. And it lets us talk about how our talents and treasures can be another pathway for us to grow deeper in a relationship with God and mission. Oftentimes people will say, how does if anything, we're supposed to move away from the desire for money, or, move away from that and more towards who God is. But talk a little bit about what it is that you're trying to help people understand by using that money to move closer to God.
Well, you've touched upon one of Tom's very favorite subjects. We actually live in a fairly affluent community, and the pursuit of money, the amassing of money, is a big part of the culture in our community. And so it's very important that we understand that love of money, that pursuit of money, as part of the lived experience of our parishioners, and how we tie that back to faith is incredibly important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think, Jesus said that you cannot choose both God and money, right? You got to choose one or the other as like the number one thing in your life. And that was true in a largely agrarian society 2,000 years ago. How much more true is it in our, society that's the most marketed to society in the history of the world? And so again, I think one is just we have to take the reality that God competes for our hearts, with money. And that's just true. And that's just a fact. I think the other thing is, while people get nervous about talking about money, if you were to say to people, do you want to be a generous person? Do you want to think of yourself as a generous person? Do you hope other people think of you as a generous person? Do you want God to think you as a generous person? Everyone say, yes, of course. And so we try to frame it in that way. Let's grow in generosity, which means ultimately tithing and giving, as we talk about, but it's about becoming more, again, that character of God. God loves, so God gives. Mm-hmm. Right? We want to become people who love, so we give. And even before that, again, reminding that God is a provider and he owns everything, and we get to be his stewards. So a lot of different thoughts to think about through that week, but yeah, about growing in generosity and growing in our trust in God.
Yeah. And there's a joy in giving, just like there's a joy in serving. And it's wonderful to be able to awaken that joy in people. We see donors in our parish, both, high capacity donors and more modest givers who have been awakened to the joy of giving.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's often, the stories we know of people who, again, sat in a stewardship weekend, and when we talked about being a good steward and giving, and say that's when the light came on, and that happened like through giving, and they understood their relationship with Christ went to a whole brand new level. So on each of these steps, we hope not every step's going to kind of lighten you up. As Father Michael said, I love talking about money, not because I know it changed my relationship with Christ, and understanding what God taught. So not every single step's going to kind of light you up,
Mm-hmm.
but we do hope that one of them will light you up and kind of, again, bring this joy, as Father Michael talked about, to your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love that word generosity, Tom, and I think it goes back to one's relationship with Christ as well. And as you grow in that relationship, I have seen people at parishes, as they have grown in that deeper relationship and experience at a parish, their generosity grows. They want to give to the very thing that is helping them grow so that others can experience that as well, you know? And
That's a great definition of generosity, right? Giving so that others can
yeah,
experience what you have, right? Yeah.
yeah. And, we live in such a society where why do people the majority of time want to acquire more money? Well, to acquire more things, and also re, they um they worry about their retirement. They want to live in that adult community, that assisted living, that they can go through all the phases if they need to. Like, that's a big topic of conversation around here. I don't know if that's there, but and so so generosity sometimes is a percentage and not the heart. Meaning, yeah, I'll give my 3% to the church, but but generosity really comes from what we just talked about. I desire others to experience what I've experienced, so I want to give more, and that's, I think, really how that generosity grows. So, yeah, so glad that that's in the book as well.
Yeah, and I think they go, hand in hand, right? It's you have to have some objective criteria for yourself. So we do talk about becoming a percentage giver, and as Father Michael says, that's often the game changer in people when they think about giving a percentage versus just, kind of what's left over or pocket change. But yeah, on all those things, the heart is the issue, and that's what Father Michael said, being a cheerful giver. And
Yeah,
we try to talk about that as well.
yeah. Now the fourth week, um, something I think a lot of the listeners are probably engaged in, or have been engaged in, or probably been encouraged to participate in, which is the fourth week is engage in Christian community. And something that's at the heart of me, and I know you guys as well, small groups. How impactful, I know you guys have written on that before, but why? Why is that so important? Maybe again, Tom, I like the fact that you said, hey, maybe there's a skeptical Catholic listening right now. What's the encouragement to small groups and engage in the Christian community?
Well, I like to say that on the weekends, I talk to you and you sit in rows listening to me. In small group, you sit in a circle and it's your turn to talk. And it continues the conversation. By Tuesday, nobody remembers what I said from the pulpit. By Wednesday, I don't even remember what I said from the pulpit. But in a small group, the conversation continues throughout the course of the week. And that's really the highest compliment that I can get when it comes to preaching.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, I think even that larger chapter is engage in Christian community it's a big thing in our, just to step back a little bit, it's a big thing in our culture to say kind of my own faith, or I'm just going to go, find God in nature or by myself. But, and I get maybe some other religions say that's okay, but really Christianity's always been about a communal nature and connect. It can't be just your, Father Michael will say, your faith is personal. It's not private, right? So we do have a personal, but it's not meant to just be isolated and all by myself. And so, yeah, for us, again, most of those days are on small groups because we know all the things that Father Michael said, that it's an opportunity to share and have conversations, to continue the conversation, and that we just need some friends in faith. That it's just a principle. Your friends, your relationships, they will influence you for good or for bad. If we want to influence it to grow in faith, we need to be intentional in some way, and that small groups are kind of our delivery system for finding friends in faith.
Yeah.
As well as our delivery system for pastoral care, too.
Mm-hmm.
In a large parish such as our parish, it's impossible for me to attend to the pastoral needs, the ministerial needs of the congregation. But I don't have to. Parishioners can do that for one another. They can attend to and be attentive to and care for one another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Father Michael, you just helped me remember something I couldn't remember. I was at a parish the other day working with some leaders. Do you remember the Stephen ministry?
Yes.
Yeah. Like the Stephen ministry was based off of, if I remember it correctly, this is going back many, many years. I believe it was the pastor had a group of ministers who were out in the community, and I think at some level small group settings, and would report back to the pastor the very needs and the way in which they were ministering to them, and using the pastor as a way to say, hey, yeah, that's good, or maybe it's another way. Here's another way in which we can serve that person. But I love that fact, Father Michael, that you're helping listeners to understand is in the small groups, they are places to be ministered to, but also an opportunity for maybe that faith leader to share, with a pastor or someone, some other leadership at the parish. Here are some challenges. How else can we help minister? It's a good means of communication too.
Yeah, and what we found again, in small groups, is that as people gather in community, right, everyone, again, they help in so many different ways that can kind of, we have a fundamental need to be understood. We have a fundamental need for people to kind of identify our story, right, and our struggles. And when
Yeah.
you get some, men together who are all fathers and husbands and have the kids somewhere around the same age or a little bit different ages, they can oh my God, again, we find over and over again, oh my gosh, there's somebody else who gets my story. There's someone else who gets my challenge of trying to, follow Christ or just be a good person, a person of character in a culture that's not always like that, or in the business world and who's trying to be a good father, husband, whatever. Just knowing there's some other people
Yeah.
that helps bear one another's burdens, as
Yeah.
Galatians says. Or again, in those times where bad, struggles happen, challenges happen for all of us, lose a job, um, loss of a loved one, or even the celebrations of life, have a new baby, or um, whatever happens, that the groups come together naturally and help one another. And again, as we couldn't possibly know all the challenges of the people going on in our parish, and even in a size parish of maybe 500 people, the pastor can't know everything that's going on. But
Yeah.
groups can come together, and there's like someone who knows about you, cares about you, and we're all going to have challenges in life. We're all going to hit those rough spots. Small groups, a place where you can care for one another.
Yeah. Yeah. And, some of the challenges that I see when it comes to people deciding whether they want to or don't want to be part of a small group, I think one of the barriers is the vulnerability. I'm going to be part of a small group and have to share about myself. Like there's that people hesitate to be a little vulnerable. But for those who are listening, that might be your barrier. Um, Reach out to people on a one-to-one basis in your parish who are part of a small group, and ask them about that. Ask them how they overcame that, or what was their experience about that. Because there's so many stories I'm sure all three of us could share about how people can overcome that. But you know, um, my listeners know this, but I've been in recovery for 31 years. I couldn't do it alone.
Mm.
Can't do it alone. When I became a father for the first time, that was just like, whoa. My parish community, I had entered into a new parish community. They had this men's group, and it was Sunday morning at like 7 a.m. or something like that. And I said to my wife, "Oh man, are you kidding me?" She's like, "Just go, go, go." It was one of the greatest experiences I've ever had, and I'm still friends with them. A few of those, 26 years later. Um, and you're right, Tom, and Father Michael as well. We meet people who journey with us. We're meant. God desires us to journey with each other, not individually. I love the fact that I have people who journey with me in my faith, because I need that. I just need that in everything about my life. So
You know what we find too, Darren, is I think people don't know how much they need it. And then when they get into a group and they just, and again, it's not, the vulnerability, I think people have to go at their own pace with that. That's fine. But this, like, I think the vulnerability is when somebody else shares, yeah, this is what's going on. And everyone's like, oh, you too. And, that's going on in your life. And just, again, a relaxation. I've seen it so many times with guys in groups, like, man, all right, I'm not alone. And that's all I need to know. And that's that's the presence of other people who are trying to follow Christ can be really good for our hearts and souls.
yeah. So what about week 5? Practice prayer sacraments. And one of the things that you spoke about in that chapter was really building that daily prayer life. Why? What's the emphasis for people to hear? Like, why is that important?
Well, I think as Catholics, all too often, it's a 1 hour a week kind of deal. We go to Mass, check the box, as they say, and then we're done for the week. We talk about the Eucharist as the source and summit of our faith. We forget about the source part, that really the Eucharist should be leading us into the daily habit, the daily practice of walking with the Lord. And that requires a discipline, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think everyone knows prayer is kind of supposed to be part of life, but again, hopefully we talk about trying to through that week, giving some aspects to prayer that is, as Father Michael, that kind of we see in the Mass, but then can be part of us. So we do talk about, worship and the part that's contrition and repentance and thanksgiving. The word Eucharist means thanksgiving. And then, of course, the part of the prayer that everybody else does the most is probably petition or asking God for help. But to have a fuller prayer life, we want to do that. We talk about listening to God and then persevering. So those are all kind of aspects of the prayer life that hopefully, again, and kind of awaken a deeper relationship with God that goes beyond just asking or goes beyond just kind of throwing up prayer, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for me, what was very a significant change when I really started to pursue that personal relationship with Christ. The Sunday Mass, being at the Sunday Mass back before I really started pursuing it, was that weekly being with God, and when I started pursuing that relationship, it was every day, just, and I started simple. Hey, Lord, I'm here. Are you there? Like, I'm here. Are you showing up? Because I'm showing up, you know? And in the beginning, I really loved and still do, reading the gospel stories. It really helped me to say, to place myself in that with him each and every day. And that has grown. And it's really, and that's why I like this chapter and this daily habit, because it really helps us to see that he desires to be part of our lives every day, not just Sunday. Sunday is very significant in our lives, but every day can be that source. Father Michael said, that source of grace, that source of strength, that source of healing. When I turn to him, and reconciliation has become more of that grace that helps transform me instead of that place where I feel I need to own my wrongs and then get washed and then I, rinse and, get rinsed out. It's really been a place of transforming and see how I'm growing in the holiness that God truly desires me to grow. And that's what I love about this week as well. It really makes you reflect on that.
Yeah, it's interesting you say about, and Father Michael, if you go to once a week, you would never eat once a week, right? You eat every day because you need the nourishment, right? So, I mean, and it is interesting once you have the prayer habit. I was away with some of our college students last week at a conference, but just had a conversation with one of the young men, like kind of walking, and we're talking about a daily prayer practice, and I'm like, and he was trying to form one, and was talking about that. And we do talk about that in the book too, about, the basics of you need a plan, a time, a place, and a plan. It's that simple, right? Just like with anything else, if you want to go work out, what's your workout? When are you going to do it? Where are you going to do it? But it was just interesting talking about him. And once you begin that practice, you long for it, like any virtue, like long to work out. And those days when you don't have that daily prayer, like I didn't pray yesterday, had a late night the night before for things outside my control. Wasn't out like partying, but just, I had things outside my control. Late night, got up, had to take my son somewhere right away, take him to work. And I really was just reflecting this morning, man, my day was off all day yesterday and I didn't pray. And so you come to long for it and need it as we develop that practice, and you see the difference it makes in your life when you practice it.
Yeah. When I'm with groups at parishes talking about how important this relationship and developing some type of daily relationship or prayer, and I often get a chuckle about this. Imagine if I married my wife and I said, "Hey, look, I'm so glad that we're now married. Here's what's going to happen. We're going to see each other once a week. That's it." Like imagine having that type of that's not the intent of that relationship, you
Mhm.
know? That's not the relationship God desires with us either. He desires to be deep relationship, intimate, everyday type relationship. So anyways,
It's
the
good
last,
enough.
yeah, so it's something really to think about, right? Like imagine even a best friend. Hey, glad we're really good friends. Only gonna see you maybe once a month. It doesn't work that way. Thank God my wife is very patient with me. Just like God's patient with us, right? He'll be there. Week 6, the last week, share your faith. You emphasize invest and invite. Tell us about that. What were your intentions with that?
Well, I think that this step is the most difficult one for Catholics because traditionally we didn't take on the task of evangelization, at least at the parish level. And the approach that we are advocating makes it entirely simple and completely accessible. We talk about invest and invite, as you mentioned, invest in friends, family members, neighbors who don't have a church. And when you have the opportunity, invite them to your church.
Yeah,
It's simple and anybody can do it.
yeah, yeah. Thank you, Father Michael. Tom, thoughts on that?
Yeah, yeah, not much more than that. I think it's about trying to put, as you say, lower rungs in the ladder, making it easy and accessible for people. Um, Again, it's about I think the whole chapter about having a heart for people who don't have a relationship with God. And this is kind of naturally the last of our final steps. Although sometimes when people get excited about their faith, they start here. But just like as we appreciate what we have, right? We're not, as we say in the book, we're not trying to prove to people they're wrong and we're right and we have the one true faith. What we're trying to do is share a relationship with Christ, that we have something they don't have, right? It's been said about sharing our faith, about trying to show one hungry person show another hungry person where they can find some food. And so, again, hopefully this comes out of, the invest and invite too, is we're not afraid to share about a great restaurant we've been to. We're not, people will talk about a movie. If they've seen a great movie, you'll tell others about it. We'll tell others about your relationship with Christ, or hopefully you have a great church. Tell others about your church so that other people can come to a deeper relationship with Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, oftentimes I'll encourage, and the way you guys encourage in here, invest in just a few. Don't try to think it's about trying to evangelize everyone. The Holy Spirit will place people in your lives when he feels necessary for you to be that witness, but invest in a few. And invest in a few in the way that we're called to accompany others, right? The way that the Lord's accompanying you. And I love the way that Pope Francis writes it in The Joy of the Gospel. He says, with prudence and compassion, remember that people are where they are at, not where you're at, right? And be great listeners in that way and witness there. There's a training, I like to call it a formation. They call it training. The Catherine Siena Institute has Ananias, and it really helps people grow in an understanding of how do we witness and share our faith with others, and because oftentimes we want to tell them where they need to be instead of witness to the transformation that's happened, and how my faith, how that relationship with Christ is really relevant to the struggles in my life,
Yeah, one of the day's reflections is just on that. What is your reason? And it can be personal. We talk about different ways, and even just connecting in a very simple way. Are you attracted to God because of the good, the true, the beautiful?
Mm-hmm.
Do you love beauty and you see God, the beauty of God? Unity, do you just see how God brings people together? Or even just you've seen how it's worked in your life. So just knowing our story and why we're attracted sets us up so that if someone does ask us about the reason for our hope, as Peter wrote, we have that answer, and it doesn't have to feel like fake. It comes from just who we are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there it is, listeners. The 6 weeks of this book, Rebuilt Faith, great book. Thank you so much, Father Michael and Tom, for kind of sharing this with us. What would be your words of encouragement for our listeners moving forward from listening to this podcast? What would be some of your words of encouragement for them?
Well, I would just say that we're really talking about very simple steps, very simple, very accessible steps, perhaps not always easy steps, but entirely simple steps. And as we give, and as we serve, and as we engage in Christian community, and as we practice prayer and sacraments, we grow to be more like Christ. It's a natural progression. And in the process, he becomes more, we become less.
Mm-hmm.
But in that exchange, we become a better version of ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love simple, Father Michael. Simple's good, right? Keep it simple. Tom, what would some of your words of encouragement?
Yeah, I don't know if I have much more to add than what Father Michael said. I totally agree that these aren't steps that are too far away from you. They're right near you. And some of the things we're talking about are opportunities to do just in your everyday life. Some, might take a little bit more effort to make happen. But they're right there. When we move, God will move, and we'll see his grace in our lives. We just have to take the step of where God's leading us, and then we'll see God and his presence and his grace move in our lives.
Mm-hmm. Great. My words of encouragement will be, if you haven't picked up the book yet, pick up the book. Really read it. Allow it to help you reflect on who are others that you could share it with. And also, if you have a small group at your parish, read it together. Allow this to be a journey that you can do this together. And again, Lent would be a great time for you to do this. Where you can get the books will be in the show notes. Tom, do you want to give any information as to where they could do that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's available on Amazon where the books are sold, but AveMariaPress.com is our publisher, AveMariaPress.com. And there, if a parish want to encourage everybody in their parish or a large number of people in their parish to read it, there's a kit to help with running a campaign, and then also a bulk order discount, so you can get it pretty inexpensively. You can check that out at AveMariaPress.com. Then you can always find us at ChurchNativity.com as well.
Yes. And any pastors listening, here's what I love about the kit. It gives you everything. You don't have to worry about it, right? I saw the kit. I love it. It will, if you're looking to start something for Lent, it will give you everything that you need. So thank you again, Father Michael and Tom, for being here. It's been a pleasure having this conversation with you, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Darren.
Thank you. Well, wasn't that a great episode with Father Mike White and Tom Corcoran? Thank you again for sharing your insights with the book. I want to encourage you to get the book if you haven't had the opportunity to read it, and also encourage you to use it in small groups at your parish where you go through the book sharing with one another your experience. If you haven't had the opportunity, please hit subscribe or like. It always helps the algorithms with YouTube and the podcast to spread the good news to other people like you who are looking for information like this. And also go over to our Facebook group to join our Facebook group and share with the community your experiences and ask questions. I always post the episodes there as well. Thanks again for being with us, and God bless.